the Jayda InStitches show, and welcome to the first installment in the 2018 calendar blanket project. This year we are going to learn a new crochet stitch pattern every month, and each month we are going to build that new pattern onto the blanket that we have in progress. So you can decide ahead of time if you want to purchase the yarn you'd like for your blanket, depending on colors, your decor tastes, or possibly just color combinations that you like. Or if this is the year you have resolved to bust through your stash, like I have, then feel free to shop your collection and select yarns that you like, combinations of colors, or just whatever you have a lot of. And you can build this project along with me using whatever you have on hand. In the mid-1800s, a time commonly known as the Victorian Era, crochet, as we know it today, really came into its own. And since stitch patterns weren't necessarily named or cataloged or even written down, the way in which a young lady would learn a new pattern stitch would be to sit with someone else who had either created it or had learned it from someone, and they would make long samples of the pattern stitch, which they would then take home and attach to other long samples of other pattern stitches. It was in this way that they had something to refer to anytime they wanted to use that pattern later on for a new project. I went ahead and gathered together the yarn from my stash that I want to use for the blanket project. I probably have around 1,500 grams of yarn here, which is a lot more than I'm going to need. There's going to be 12 different pattern stitches, approximately 100 grams for each pattern stitch, and some are going to use a little more, some of them are going to use a little less, but you can count on around 100 grams per stripe of pattern. I'm using 100% acrylic. I'm using medium worsted weight yarn size 4. You can use whatever you want if you want to start with a DK weight or a lightweight, baby weight, but you have to keep the same size yarn throughout the entire blanket project, and it's best to keep with the same fiber too. So if you start with acrylic, finish with acrylic. If you start with wool, finish with wool. If you start with a medium weight size 4 yarn, then you want to use the same thing all the way through. And now, the 2018 January pattern stitch. This is Little Fishes. Probably has a few other names considering how old a stitch like this is, but I learned it as Little Fishes, and it sort of looks like a bunch of little fishes swimming back and forth in a stream. It's open, it's lacy, and it's not difficult, so it's the perfect little stitch pattern to start our 2018 project off with. And enough talking! Let's grab our hooks, grab our yarn, we'll head on over to the craft table, and we will begin the 2018 calendar blanket together. I will be using worsted weight, medium, size 4 acrylic yarn for my entire blanket. It's important that you begin and finish with the same kind of yarn. For each stripe in this blanket, I will need approximately 100 grams. I will be using a 5.5 millimeter hook, or an I9. And I will also need a pair of scissors and a yarn needle. And if you've got all that together, we can get started. We're going to begin with a slip knot. The Little Fishes pattern itself can be worked over any multiple chain length of 6. So if you were working this as its own blanket, you could begin with a chain foundation row that was any multiple of 6 chains. But because this is going to be part of a larger blanket, we are going to begin with 126 chains. 126 chains. Make sure you have 126 chains, or if you're doing this as a separate blanket, a multiple that is exactly a multiple of 6 chains. So make sure you count, and that is the correct number. We're going to begin by finding the 9th chain from the hook. So that's quite a ways away. 9th chain from the hook, and into that chain we're going to single crochet. This is the foundation row. So row 1 of this Little Fishes pattern is the foundation row. It's going to be a bit different from rows 2 and 3. So remember, you're just creating your foundation pattern row here. We're going to chain 3, skip the next 2 chains, find the 3rd, and you're going to double crochet into it. Chain 3, skip the next 2 chains, find the 3rd, and single crochet into it. chain 3, skip the next 2 chains, find the third, and double crochet into it. And that is the foundation pattern row for little fishes. Chain 3, skip 2 chains, find the next one, single crochet. Chain 3, skip 2 chains, find the next one, double crochet. You're going to repeat that all the way across, and you're going to end with a double crochet in the last chain of your foundation chain row. At the end of row 1, you should have something that looks like this. Double crochets and single crochets alternating all the way across, separated by 3 chains up top and 2 chains underneath. That turning chain, the big wraparound that we started with, which was a single crocheting into that 9th chain. 2 of these chains along the bottom are considered those separators, and 1, 2, 3 up and 1, 2, 3 across. So those 6 turning chains, that counts as a double crochet chain 3. So that's not super important for row 1, but it is important to remember that every odd row will begin with a chain 6 from here on out in this pattern, and that chain 6 turning chains will always count as a double crochet chain 3. So just something to keep in the back of your head. But this is what it should look like all the way across, and you should have ended with a double crochet in the last chain. So single crochet chain 3, skip 2, double crochet in the last chain. We're going to chain 1, turn our work, and this is row 2, or the first repeating row of the little fishes pattern. So every row, the rest of this pattern from here on out will be repeating rows 2 and 3, or the even and odd rows. So this is an even row. Row 2, we're going to begin with a single crochet in the top of this double crochet. So single crochet in the top of that double crochet stitch. You're going to chain 2, find the next single crochet stitch, and into the top of that we're going to work double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. So a classic V-stitch, double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, all worked into the top of that little single crochet from the previous row. Chain 2, find the next stitch, which is a double crochet, and single crochet into the top of it. Chain 2, find the next stitch, which is a single crochet, and work double crochet, chain 1, double crochet into it. And that's all you have to do across for row 2. So we're chaining 2 chains in between our little stitches. Into the top of every double crochet, you're going to just simply single crochet. Chain 2 before moving on, find the next stitch, which will be a single crochet, and work double crochet, chain 1, double crochet into it, or a classic V-stitch, however it's easy for you to remember. Chain 2 before moving on, whoops. Find the next stitch, that'll be a double crochet, and just single crochet into the top of it. And that's it. You can work your way across row 2, or the even row. I'm going to try and keep my yarn on my hook here. And I'll see you at the end. At the end of row 2, or any even row, you're going to finish your V-stitch, or your double crochet, chain 1, double crochet into that last single crochet you see there. And then you come up upon that big chain 6 turning chain, which will usually be a turning chain of 6. So if this was the first row, that'll be 9, but technically we're only looking at 6 of these. You're going to chain 2, because you always need to have, on an even row, 2 chains in between your little stitches, whether it's a single or a V-stitch. And then you're going to count over 1, 2, 3 chains, find the 4th one, and single crochet into it. And that's how you end a row 2 or every even row. So a V-stitch or double crochet, chain 1, double crochet goes into that last single crochet from the previous row. Chain 2, skip 3 chains of the turning chain, find the 4th, and single crochet into it. That is a row 2 or an even row. Now is row 3 or every odd row from here on out. Every odd row begins with a chain 6 and a turn. That chain 6 counts as a double crochet, chain 3. You're going to find the first V-stitch, so you can pull it apart if that helps. That's double crochet, chain 1, double crochet from the previous row, so V-stitch. Into that space, or that chain 1 space, you're just going to single crochet. In the odd rows, we're back to separating everything with 3 chains, so chain 3. Skip over to the next thing, which is a single crochet. So if you pull it apart, you can see that. There's a single crochet from the previous row. Double crochet into the top of that stitch. And that's it for the odd rows. Chain 3 in between stitches. A V-stitch from the previous row gets a single crochet right in the middle of it. Chain 3. The next thing will be a single crochet. That gets a double crochet in the top of it. And that's it. Chain 3, single crochet into the middle of the V-stitch. You're skipping those little chain 2 spaces from the previous row. So just look for your stitches. So there's a single crochet into the top of that V-stitch. Chain 3, the next thing is a little single crochet from the previous row, and double crochet into it. You can repeat that all the way across, and I will catch up with you at the end of row 3. At the end of row 3, or every odd row, you work your last single crochet into the top or the middle of that V-stitch from the previous row. Don't forget to chain 3. That brings you to the end, and there's a single crochet at the very end from the previous row. You're going to double crochet into the top of that stitch. And that is every odd row, or a row 3. And remember, we're repeating pattern. The pattern repeat is row 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, or even odd, for as long as you want to make this pattern. For counting your stitches, you may have noticed that we began with 126 chains, and that morphed into 161 stitches in each row. So that can be a little cumbersome and a little confusing, so we're just going to skip the counting stitches part. And if you want to keep track of where you're at, every odd row, so a row 3, the one we just did, you're going to see those big chain 3 spaces in between your stitches. It's easier to count the spaces. So 1, 2, 3. You see the spaces in your odd rows. You should have 40 of them. 40 chain 3 spaces after the end of every odd row. And if you want to count your even rows, so if you pull it apart, you can see that there's the V-stitch, there's a V-stitch. You can just count the V-stitches, and you should have 20 V-stitches at the end of every even row or row 2. So that's how you can keep track of the stitches in your pattern, or a little easy stitch count. And to continue with this pattern, we're just going to repeat rows 2 and 3, 2 and 3. I'm going to repeat rows 2, 3, 2, 3 at least twice more so that I can make my stripe a little wider, but you can make your stripe as wide as you like. This is what the Victorians would have done when practicing a stitch pattern. Remember that every row 2 or even row starts with a chain 1, turn, and a single crochet in the top of that double crochet that you start with. It's 2 stitches in between little stitch motifs. Into every single crochet from the previous row goes a V-stitch, or double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. And then you chain only 2, and when you get to a double crochet from the previous row, you just single crochet into it. So that's a row 2 or an even row, and a row 3 begins with a chain 6 turn, and you immediately start with a single crochet in the first V-stitch that you come to. So single crochet goes into the middle of a V-stitch, you chain 3 in between stitch motifs in an odd row, and then you just work a double crochet in the top of every single crochet from the previous row. If you need to go back and look at those previous 2 rows that we worked, you can do that. Repeat rows 2 and 3, or even and odd, a few more times, and I'll catch up with you. I have worked 9 rows in total of the Little Fishes pattern. So row 1 was the establishing row. Rows 2 and 3, or the even and odd rows, are the rows that we repeat, and I've repeated even, odd, even, odd, even, odd 3 times in total. So that's 9 rows, And there's an easy way to count how many rows. You can count this sort of the big spaces up the side. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 rows. Easy way to count how many rows you've done. And that's as wide as I'm going to make the first row, or the first stripe, I should say, the first big pattern stripe of my Victorian stitch sampler for the 2018 calendar blanket. And I'm going to be changing colors for every single row. And I'm actually going to be putting a special little row in between all of my big stripes, just to make them all stand out a little bit. So you can do that along with me too if you like. If you want to use the same color for your entire blanket, don't fasten off. But if you're going to change colors like me because you're busting through your scrap stash, then you can snip your yarn, fasten off, and take a moment to weave in that long tail. And you might be wondering, how are we going to do that? Well, I am going to weave the tail into the row just below. So I'm going to thread it up. I'm going to take it down the edge of that double crochet that I finished my last row with, and then I'm just going to run it under a few of the chains underneath a stitch, and then repeat. Pick up a couple of loops of those chain stitches, and then right underneath the next stitch. Then I'm going to double back. I'm going to go over top of that last loop that I came out of, go through this one, and then double back by picking up some of the loops on those chains, and then back under that stitch. Don't pull too tight because you don't want to change any of the tension. And that should be good. You can snip whatever little tail is left. And we're all ready to add our next stripe of Victorian stitch sampler. And that is Little Fishes, and the first installment in our 2018 calendar blanket. If you'd like to help support our show, and we really appreciate it when you do, you can pop over to our Etsy shop and purchase a pattern. You'll find the link to our Etsy shop in the project description box down below. And that's it for this week, everybody. I hope you had fun making this along with me, and we'll see you soon here on the Jayda and Stitches show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, and have an awesome week. Bye, everybody.